The dare that changed everything. The crystal chandelier cast dancing shadows across the marble floor of the Grandview Hotel's ballroom, where the annual Children's Healthcare Foundation Gala was in full swing. Victoria Sterling adjusted her midnight blue gown and surveyed the crowd with the calculating gaze that had made her the youngest CEO to ever run Sterling Looks, her family's century-old fashion empire. Still hunting for your next acquisition target? The deep voice behind her carried a hint of amusement that made her spine straighten. Victoria turned to face Marcus Kane, whose dark suit was tailored to perfection and whose reputation for dismantling competitors was even sharper than his jawline. His tech company, Nexus Dynamics, had been circling her luxury market like a shark for months. "Just admiring the charity's excellent turnout," she replied smoothly, though her pulse quickened. "Though I suppose you're here to write a check large enough to make headlines tomorrow?" Marcus stepped closer, close enough that she caught his subtle cologne. Guilty as charged. Though some things are worth more than money. Before Victoria could respond, a group of their mutual acquaintances descended upon them. Champagne flutes in hand and mischief in their eyes. Rebecca Thornton, a prominent socialite known for her party games, clapped her hands together. "Perfect timing. We were just discussing how boring these events have become," Rebecca announced. "Time for a little excitement." Victoria felt a familiar dread. Rebecca's idea of excitement usually involved embarrassing dares or truth-telling. Games that belonged in college, not at a $5,000 plate charity event. "I propose a challenge," Rebecca continued, her eyes gleaming. "Our city's two most ruthless business leaders, standing here trying to outplite each other. But what would happen if we stripped away all that professional distance?" Marcus raised an eyebrow. "What exactly are you suggesting, Rebecca?" "Kiss," she said simply. "Right here, right now, between the two people who've been circling each other like prize fighters for months." The small crowd that had gathered murmured with interest, phones already emerging from evening bags. Victoria felt heat rise in her cheeks, but years of board meetings and hostile takeovers had taught her never to back down from a challenge. "Absolutely not," she said firmly. "This is a charity event, not a reality show." Marcus, however, was studying her with those penetrating dark eyes that had probably closed 1,000 deals. "Afraid it might damage your Ice Queen reputation, Sterling?" The taunt hit exactly as he'd intended. Victoria had spent years building her reputation as untouchable, unflappable, and utterly professional. But something about Marcus Kane had always gotten under her skin in ways that had nothing to do with business. "Fine," she heard herself saying. "But when this backfires spectacularly, don't blame me." Marcus stepped forward, and suddenly the ballroom. Noise faded to background murmur. His hand found her waist, steady and warm through the silk of her dress. Victoria looked up into his eyes, expecting to see the cold calculation she knew from their business encounters. Instead, she saw something that made her breath catch. When his lips met hers, it was supposed to be quick, meaningless, a way to shut up Rebecca's crowd and move on with the evening. But the moment their mouths touched, Victoria felt something electric shoot through her entire body. Marcus's kiss was gentle but commanding. And when he pulled back after what felt like both an eternity and an instant, she found herself slightly breathless. The crowd applauded and dispersed, already moving on to the next entertainment. But Victoria and Marcus remained frozen, staring at each other with the dawning realization that everything had just changed. "Well," Marcus said quietly, his voice rougher than usual. "That was unexpected." Victoria smoothed her dress with hands that weren't quite steady. "It was nothing, just a silly dare." But as she walked away, she could feel his eyes following her, and she knew with absolute certainty that she was lying. Boardroom warfare. The sleek conference room on the 42nd floor of Sterling Looks's headquarters had never felt smaller. Victoria sat at the head of the polished obsidian table, her cream-colored blazer a stark contrast to her thunderous mood. Across from her, Jasper Montgomery, her chief operating officer and closest confidant, spread quarterly reports like battle plans. "The Meridian Group is scheduled to announce their decision next week," Jasper said, his British accent crisp with concern. "If we lose this partnership, Marcus Kane will have exclusive access to the European luxury tech market." Victoria's fingers drummed against the table's surface. 3 days had passed since the gala. She hadn't been able to shake the memory of that kiss, or the way Marcus had looked at her afterward. Worse, she'd caught herself checking business news obsessively, hoping for mentions of his company. "What's our competitive advantage?" she asked, forcing herself to focus. "Heritage and craftsmanship," Jasper replied immediately. "Sterling Looks has been synonymous with quality for over a century. Nexus Dynamics may have innovative technology, but they lack our established reputation." The conference room door opened, and Victoria's assistant Claire peered in nervously. "Ms. Sterling, the Meridian Group has moved up the final presentation. It's this afternoon at 3, and—" She paused. "Mr. Kane's team will be presenting immediately before yours." Victoria's stomach clenched. She'd been hoping to avoid Marcus until after the deal was settled, giving her time to process whatever had happened between them. Apparently fate had other plans. 2 hours later, Victoria found herself in Meridian Group's downtown offices, watching through glass doors as Marcus concluded his presentation. Even from a distance, she could see his commanding presence. The way he gestured with confidence as charts and projections filled the wall-mounted screens. Nina Valdez, Marcus's head of strategic development, emerged from the presentation room first. Her sharp bob and sharper suit gave her an intimidating air that Victoria respected despite their rivalry. Sterling Nina nodded curtly, ready to lose gracefully. Before Victoria could respond, Marcus appeared in the doorway. Their eyes met. Across the reception area, and Victoria felt that same electric jolt from 3 nights ago, he'd loosened his tie slightly. God. And there was something in his expression that hadn't been there during their previous business encounters. A warmth that made her pulse quicken. "Victoria," he said, approaching with measured steps. "I have to admit, I'm impressed you're still fighting for this deal." "Why wouldn't I be?" she replied, though her voice came out slightly breathless. Marcus moved closer, close enough that she caught his familiar scent, because some battles aren't worth winning if they cost you something more valuable. The cryptic comment hung between them as Meridian's CEO, Robert Chen, appeared to escort Victoria's team into the presentation room. As she passed Marcus, he caught her elbow gently. "Whatever happens in there," he said quietly. "What happened at the gala? It meant something." Victoria's carefully constructed composure wavered. "This is business, Marcus. Nothing else matters." But even as she said it, she knew she was trying to convince herself as much as him. The presentation went flawlessly. Victoria outlined Sterling Looks' expansion plans, demonstrated their prototype luxury smartwatches embedded with rare gems, and painted a picture of European market dominance that had the Meridian executives leaning forward with interest. Yet throughout the entire 45 minutes, she found herself thinking about Marcus's words, about the way he'd looked at her, about how the kiss that was supposed to mean nothing had somehow changed everything as her team packed up their materials. Robert Chen shook her hand warmly. "Excellent presentation, Miss Sterling. We'll have our decision by Friday." Walking to the elevators, Jasper studied her with concern. "You seem distracted in there. Everything all right?" Victoria pressed the button for the parking garage, watching. "The floor numbers descend. Just tired. It's been a long week." But as the elevator doors opened to reveal Marcus waiting by the valet stand, she realized her week was about to get considerably more complicated. He turned when he heard their footsteps, and the smile that crossed his face was both professional and something much more personal. "Drink?" he asked simply. "To celebrate surviving another corporate battlefield?" Jasper raised an eyebrow, clearly sensing undercurrents he didn't understand. Victoria hesitated, knowing that accepting would cross a line she'd spent years maintaining, between business and personal. "One drink?" she heard herself saying. "But we talk business only." Marcus's smile widened. "Of course, strictly business." But as they walked toward the nearby hotel bar, Victoria suspected they both knew that ship had already sailed. Secrets beneath the surface, the amber liquid in Victoria's glass caught the dim light of the hotel bar as she stared at it, avoiding Marcus's penetrating gaze. What was supposed to be a quick professional drink had stretched into 2 hours of conversation that had nothing to do with business and everything to do with the tension crackling between them. "You never answered my question about why you really got into luxury goods," Marcus said, leaning back in the leather booth. His tie was completely gone now, his shirt collar open. Victoria found herself distracted by the glimpse of his collarbone. "Family. Business," she replied automatically, the same answer she'd given in a dozen interviews. "Sterling looks has been in my family for generations." Marcus shook his head. "That's what you tell reporters. I'm asking what you tell yourself at 3. In the morning when you can't sleep?" The observation hit too close to home. Victoria did have sleepless nights, though they were usually filled with memories of her father's workshop, the smell of leather and metal polish, his weathered hands teaching her to distinguish between genuine craftsmanship and mass-produced imitations. "My father," she said quietly, surprising herself. "He died when I was 22? Heart attack in his workshop, surrounded by half-finished prototypes for a new jewelry line." Marcus's expression softened. "I'm sorry. The board wanted to sell the company immediately," said a young woman couldn't possibly run a luxury empire. Victoria's fingers tightened around her glass. "I've spent the last 8 years proving them wrong, but sometimes I wonder if I'm fighting the right battles." Before Marcus could respond, her phone buzzed. A text from Evelyn, her younger sister. "Emergency at the foundation. Need you here now." Victoria's blood chilled. The Theo Sterling Foundation was her most closely guarded secret, a charitable organization she'd established in her father's memory, funding art therapy programs for children in hospitals. Only family and her lawyer knew she was the anonymous donor behind it. "I have to go," she said, standing abruptly. Marcus caught her wrist gently. "Victoria, wait. There's something I need to tell you about the Meridian deal." "Not now," she said, pulling away. "Whatever game you're playing, Marcus, I'm not in the mood." But as she hurried toward the exit, she caught something in his expression that looked less like manipulation and more like genuine concern. 20 minutes later, Victoria found herself in the cramped office of the Theo Sterling Foundation, housed in a nondescript building downtown. Eileen paced frantically, her usually perfect blonde hair disheveled. "Eileen Lord just served eviction papers," Evelyn said without preamble. "Apparently the building's been sold to a development company. They want us out in 30 days. Victoria sank into a chair, her mind reeling. Who bought it? Some subsidiary of a tech company. The paperwork is buried in corporate shells, but the lawyers mentioned something about expanding into mixed shoes. Developments. Evelyn handed her the eviction notice. "Vicky, if we lose this space, we lose everything. The art rooms, the therapy sessions, all of it." Victoria scanned the legal documents, her practiced eye-catching details that made her stomach clench. The acquiring company's registration numbers looked familiar, too familiar. "Get me everything you can find about the purchase," she told Evelyn. "Corporate filings, subsidiary connections, everything." While Evelyn worked her laptop, Victoria called her own lawyer, Thomas Hartwell, who'd been handling her family's legal affairs for decades. "Thomas, I need you to trace a property acquisition for me," she said. Rattling off the address and case numbers 20 minutes later, her phone rang. "Victoria?" Thomas's voice was grim. "The building was purchased through Meridian Holdings, which is a subsidiary of Kane Development, which is owned by Marcus Kane," Victoria finished, her voice hollow. The pieces fell into place with devastating clarity. Marcus hadn't just been competing for the Meridian Group partnership. He'd been systematically acquiring properties throughout the arts district, probably as part of some larger development scheme. The foundation her father would have loved, the children's programs she'd poured her heart into, were just collateral damage in his business expansion. Evelyn looked up from her laptop. "There's more. Kane Development has purchase agreements on 6 other buildings in this block. They're planning a complete redevelopment, luxury condos and high-end retail." Victoria's hands trembled with rage and something that felt dangerously close to heartbreak. The man who'd kissed her like he meant it, who'd listened to her talk about her father with what seemed like genuine understanding, had been planning to destroy her father's legacy all along. Her phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Can we finish our conversation? There are things you need to know." Victoria stared at the message, remembering the concern in his eyes, the way he'd tried to tell her something about the Meridian deal. Had he known? Had he been trying to warn her? Or was this just another manipulation tactic? She thought about the kiss, about the way her heart had raced when he'd said it meant something, about how for the first time in years she'd allowed herself to imagine that someone might understand the pressure she carried, the loneliness of always having to be perfect and untouchable. "What do we do?" Evelyn asked quietly. Victoria looked around the small office at the walls covered with children's artwork, at the photos of young patients smiling as they worked on their therapy projects. Then she thought about Marcus Kane, about his calculating dark eyes and his reputation for acquiring whatever he wanted. "We fight," she said, her voice steady, despite the chaos in her chest. "And this time, it's personal." But even as she said it, a small voice in her head whispered that maybe, just maybe, there was more to this story than she understood. The breaking point, the Meridian Group's boardroom felt like a gladiatorial arena as Victoria took her seat. Across from Marcus, 5 days had passed since she'd discovered his company's involvement in the foundation eviction, and she'd used every one of them to prepare for war. Marcus looked haggard, his usually pristine appearance showing cracks. His suit wrinkled, dark circles under his eyes, his jaw tight with what appeared to be genuine frustration. When their eyes met, she saw something that looked almost like desperation. But Victoria had learned not to trust her instincts where he was concerned. "Before we begin," Robert Chen announced to the assembled executives, "I should mention that this decision has become considerably more complex. We've received a third proposal from Harrison International that's quite compelling." Victoria's carefully laid plans crumbled instantly. Harrison International was a massive conglomerate with resources that dwarfed both her company and Marcus's. She'd been so focused on battling Marcus that she'd missed the real threat circling them both. However, Chen continued, "We believe in loyalty to those who've worked hardest for this partnership. We're giving you both one final opportunity to present revised proposals. 24 hours to submit your best and final offers." As the meeting adjourned, Victoria gathered her materials with mechanical precision. She'd lost. Not just the deal, but everything. The foundation would be evicted. Her company's European expansion would fail, and Marcus Kane would probably find a way to profit from the disaster. "Victoria, wait." Marcus's voice stopped her at the conference room door. She turned, her professional mask perfectly in place despite the chaos beneath. "Congratulations on your clever maneuvering, Marcus. Using the foundation eviction as leverage was particularly ruthless." His face crumpled with what looked like genuine anguish. "You think I God, Victoria? You have no idea what's really happening, do you?" "I know exactly what's happening. Your development company bought the foundations. Building, you're destroying my father's legacy, and somehow you think that gives you an advantage in this deal." Marcus stepped closer, his voice urgent. "I've been trying to tell you for days. I didn't know about the foundation until 3 days ago. Kane Development is run by my brother Thomas, and he's been making acquisitions without my knowledge. When I found out what was happening, stop." Victoria held up a hand. "Just stop with the manipulation. I'm tired of trying to figure out which version of you is real." Before Marcus could respond, Victoria's phone buzzed with a call from Jasper. She answered, "Grateful for the interruption." "Turn on Channel 7 News." Jasper's voice was tight with controlled panic. Now Victoria's blood turned to ice as she watched the news report on her phone. A gossip journalist had obtained photos from the charity gala, photos of her and Marcus kissing, along with telephoto shots of them at the hotel bar. Looking intimate and absorbed in each other, the anchor's voice was professionally scandalized. Sources suggest that Sterling Look CEO Victoria Sterling and Nexus Dynamics CEO Marcus Kane have been conducting a secret affair while their companies compete for $1 billion partnership with the Meridian Group. Industry experts question whether this relationship compromises the integrity of the bidding process. "Oh God," Victoria whispered as her phone exploded with notifications, board members, investors, reporters, all demanding explanations she didn't have. Marcus appeared beside her, his own phone buzzing incessantly. "Victoria, we need to talk. Privately, right now." "It's nothing to talk about," she said, her voice hollow. "We're done. Whatever this was, it's over. You don't understand." Merger of Hearts, the emergency board meeting at Sterling Looks felt like a tribunal. Victoria sat at the head of the conference table, facing 12 stone-faced directors who'd built their reputations on avoiding exactly this kind of scandal. The morning financial reports lay scattered across the mahogany surface like evidence in a criminal trial. Sterling Look's stock had dropped 18% overnight. "The damage to our brand integrity is catastrophic," declared board chairman William Ashford, his silver mustache bristling with indignation. "Our entire reputation is built on discretion and propriety. This ... liaison makes us look unprofessional at best, corrupt at worst." Victoria maintained her composure despite the hollow ache in her chest. She'd spent the sleepless night replaying every interaction with Marcus, trying to separate genuine moments from calculated moves. The worst part was that she still wasn't entirely sure which was which. "The relationship was personal, not professional," she said evenly. "It had no bearing on the Meridian negotiations." "The public doesn't see it that way," Ashford replied. "Harrison International's CEO called this morning. They're suggesting that both Sterling Looks and Nexus Dynamics withdraw from consideration to preserve the integrity of the bidding process." Before Victoria could respond, Jasper burst into the boardroom with uncharacteristic urgency. "Victoria, you need to see this immediately," activated the wall-mounted screen revealing a live press conference. Marcus stood behind a podium in what appeared to be Nexus Dynamics' main conference room, looking composed despite the media frenzy surrounding him. ... Which is why I'm announcing that Nexus Dynamics is formally withdrawing from the Meridian Group partnership, Marcus was saying. "However, we're not abandoning the European luxury market. Instead, we're proposing something unprecedented." Victoria's breath caught as Marcus continued. "Effective immediately, Nexus Dynamics is offering to merge our technology division with Sterling Looks' craftsmanship, expertise in a joint venture that will revolutionize luxury consumer electronics. This partnership will combine Sterling's century of heritage with our innovation capabilities, creating products that neither company could develop alone." The boardroom erupted in shocked murmurs, but Victoria barely heard them. On screen, Marcus was outlining a business proposal that was brilliant, unexpected, and exactly the kind of bold move that could save both companies from the Harrison International threat. "He can't be serious," Ashford sputtered. "A merger? With our competitor?" But Victoria was studying the presentation details Jasper had pulled up on his tablet. The proposed structure was equitable. The revenue projections were conservative, but promising, and the timeline was aggressive enough to beat Harrison to market. "It's not just brilliant," she murmured. "It's the only move that makes sense." Her phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Your boardroom. 1 hour. Trust me." Victoria looked up to find 12 pairs of eyes staring at her expectantly. In the background, financial news channels were already analyzing Marcus's announcement, with several experts calling it either a masterstroke or corporate suicide. "We're taking a recess," Victoria announced, standing. 1 hour, exactly 60 minutes later, Marcus entered the Sterling Looks boardroom, carrying a leather portfolio and wearing the same determined expression he'd had during their first business meeting months ago. But now Victoria could see past the professional facade to something warmer and more complex underneath. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began without preamble, "I'm here to propose that instead of fighting each other for scraps, we reshape the entire market." For the next 30 minutes, Marcus laid out a partnership structure that was unlike anything Victoria had ever seen. Rather than a traditional merger or acquisition, he proposed a collaborative model where Sterling Looks would maintain complete control over design and heritage branding, while Nexus provided technology integration and manufacturing efficiency. "The luxury market is fragmenting," Marcus explained, his eyes finding Victoria's across the table. "Consumers want products that honor traditional craftsmanship, but integrate seamlessly with their digital lives. Neither of our companies can deliver that alone, but together. ... He activated a presentation showing prototype designs that made Victoria's heart race jewelry that discreetly monitored health metrics, handbags with integrated wireless charging, watches that combined century-old Swiss movements with cutting-edge connectivity. "The revenue projections are conservative," Marcus continued, "but even at the low end, This partnership would generate more profit than the Meridian deal for both companies within 18 months. Board member Rebecca Harrison, no relation, to their competitor leaned forward. What about the scandal? Perception issues? Marcus's smile was rueful. We address it head-on. Two competitors who discovered that collaboration creates more value than competition. It's not a scandal if it's a success story. When the presentation ended, the boardroom fell silent. Victoria could see the calculation in her directors' faces. The slow realization that Marcus had just offered them a way to turn disaster into triumph. I need to speak with Mr. Kane privately, Victoria announced. Once they were alone in her office, Victoria moved to the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Why? She asked without turning around. The real reason? Marcus joined her. At the window, standing close enough that she could feel his warmth. Because somewhere between that charity gala and this morning's board meeting, I realized that beating you felt like losing. Because when I saw that news report and watched your face, I knew I'd rather build something with you than tear you down. He paused. And because I'm falling in love with you, and I'm tired of pretending business matters more than that. Victoria turned to face him, her carefully constructed walls finally crumbling. The foundation building? Already transferred? Back to you. Thomas is handling his resignation from Kane Development this afternoon. The media attention will die down when they see our quarterly reports next year. Victoria stepped closer, close enough to see the sincerity in his dark eyes. And us. Marcus reached up to touch her face gently. That depends on whether you can forgive me for not telling you about Thomas's deals sooner, and whether you're willing to take the biggest risk of your career on a partnership that has nothing to do with business. Victoria thought about her father, about the legacy she'd spent 8 years protecting, about the loneliness of always having to be perfect and untouchable. Then she thought about Marcus's kiss, about the way he'd sacrificed his own deal too. Protect her foundation, about the brilliant proposal that could secure both their futures. One condition, she said. Anything.
Ow.
Victoria smiled, feeling lighter than she had in years. The next time someone dares you to kiss me, you don't need permission. When Marcus kissed her this time, it wasn't for show or because of a dare. It was a promise of partnership in every sense of the word to competitors who'd discovered that the best victories were the ones they could share. 6 months later, the Sterling Kane luxury technology line would debut to unprecedented acclaim. But that afternoon, standing in her office overlooking the city they'd both fought to conquer, Victoria knew they'd already won something far more valuable than any business deal.